Did you happen to get Proving Grounds and are able to now have these 4 structured decks in your hands? Well, if you do, then we have a couple of ideas on what you can potentially do to help upgrade this deck to the meta that it deserves to be in so that you can compete at your locals as quickly as possible. What are those deck lists and cards that you need? Well, we'll look into that right now. Now, yeah, this is a difficult thing because especially when we saw this Proving Grounds on the Riot store, we saw the boxes that went and sold out so quick. And then we saw the Proving Grounds that were on the website for about 2 months, which is a, decent amount for sure. And then it suddenly went out of sale and it hasn't come back ever since. And then we go ahead and we take a look at TCG Player, and they're all at about between $99 and $120 for something that was originally $29.99. That's definitely not something that is encouraging, especially with a couple of cards that are going to be exclusives to these boxes in and of themselves. There's going to be no other way to necessarily get them. So that's a little bit intimidating. With that, though, it's going to be fun to see how this goes. And local game stores seem like they've even been a little bit struggling as well with getting these Proving Ground boxes. Now, one thing to note, which is really interesting, is that my local game store that I go to isn't necessarily going to be actually selling too many of the Proving Grounds. I think they're only going to be selling like 2 or 3 from what I've been told. And what they're doing instead is that the first month of this game release, they're doing their locals as someone shows up and they randomly get one of the 4 decks from the box. And so if you show up 4 times, you're going to end up with 4 decks and it ends up going to $9. Just thought that was a really cool idea, though this has nothing to do with the video. I'm telling you, because you're here, you're listening, and that's what happens. And so with that, though, really interesting idea. But in any case, if you do actually end up getting one of these Proving Grounds, I managed to get one. Riot said that they're going to be shipping supposedly on Friday, so hopefully by Tuesday at the latest, I should be able to have these in hand. This is going to be really interesting because I wonder how long it will be until these get back into print and what this will necessarily mean for collectors alike. It's going to be really interesting, and I'm curious to see what might happen. But with that, there's some really good decks out there, especially for Master Yi. He's probably the second best deck right now in the game, though we've seen, at least in the English version, he's fallen out a little bit in popularity, where more people have been going for Darius set, Kaisa especially, even Ari and Annie I've seen a little bit more than Master Yi, or even at the same amount of Annie as Master Yi in the last tournament with Runes and Rift, for example. Go ahead and check out those VODs. Really great competition right there. But with that, it's interesting to see. But Yi is still easily one of the best decks, also probably one of the best beginner-friendly decks to learn. His legend ability is just extremely good, being able to give +2 might when defending alone. That can be a huge wall for you to put up, and then having defies and charms and things of that nature can make a big difference in what you do with that. So there's a lot to have here, and there's a lot to look at. Likewise, though, Annie is also one that has been very surprising for a lot of people. Sold Out has done a really great job in the online community, entering a lot of tournament Thursday night brawls. Even the Rift Lab Trials #2 ended up getting a top 4 finish in that, which was, I think it was 8 rounds to get into the top cut, if I remember correctly, and then managed to make it to the semifinals and ended up losing to a Kaisa. When Kaisa's, 25% of the field, that's just going to happen eventually. But Annie has still turned some heads, and Sold Out has been piloting this deck so incredibly well, and it has amazing matchups in every single situation, except for Kaisa, where that's going to be the biggest struggle. But again, that is the biggest struggle for so many competitors anyway, just because of the consistency and the ability to remove so many cards so effectively. But Annie is still definitely one that you should keep an eye on, especially because it should be relatively cheap to build. The only thing is going to be like the Thousand Tail Watchers, or not the Thousand Tail Watchers, the Dariuses and the Kaisas are going to be the most expensive things for you to add. Lux and Garen. Not good. Not looking good in this set. The Lux Legend ability is decent, but the fact that you have to draw a card, or that you can draw a card when you play a spell that is 5 or more in expense, not great, because you want to be able to start using those to be able to build up your board more, not necessarily removing things. And that's what the majority of your spells are going to be doing. You're going to be wanting to play something, you know, out there like the Thousand Tail Watcher that I previously mentioned at the end game. But also, Lux doesn't have necessarily the great card draw necessarily outside of her legend ability. And so you almost find yourself lagging behind if you choose to build up your board. But then if you use removal and you're not necessarily able to clear things, or your opponent is just able to go so wide so fast, or even just move fast, like, for example, with how fast Annie is able to move, you're just going to be left behind. And that's the sad part. And it would be really interesting. I mean, it would be so broken, but anything like with... whatchamacallit, with Volibear's second ability, where if you play something, or Volibear legend ability, where if you play something mighty, aka with 5 might or more, you're able to exhaust a rune. This would be super broken, but if Lux had something where if you played something, or if you played something 5 or more, a unit or a spell, or even just locking it down to even just a unit, being able to draw a card off of that would be really good, but also extremely broken. But it would be interesting to see how that even would shake up the meta. But Lux's legend ability is just so just not really fitting well, and has fallen to the wayside. Garen is interesting. His legend ability is the worst in the game, because you do have to take over with, like, what, 4 or 5 units, and if you do, you get to draw 2 cards. Whoop-dee. That's great. That's a struggle. And Garen's colors that he has is actually a really good color combination, but the only thing that's necessarily viable for him to be competitive, and from what we've seen at least so far, has been the Aurora decks. When I was casting the Rift Lab Trials number 2, we had a really good showing from a Garen that was almost able to make it into the top cut, barely missed that, but at the end of 6 rounds, he was in the top 15, if I recall correctly. And so really interesting idea. And that's actually going to be the deck list that we base it off of. Now, with that, first and foremost, of course, we are going to be looking at Master Yi here. Now, this is the deck that you are going to be getting here, and it's got some good stuff, but doesn't necessarily have the Defies or things of that nature. It also has things that you're just not going to be using, like Zavir Sage, Mountain Drake necessarily, unless you're going Yi Aurora, you know, the Stormclaw, just not necessarily a whole lot here. And even kind of like both Master Yis, which is really interesting, but not necessarily needed in this case. Master Yi does have a much more straightforward build. Now, before we get too deep into these deck lists, it should be noted that if you do want a play set of all the cards that are exclusive to these decks, you do need to buy 2 of the Proving Grounds for a total of around $60 if you're able to find them at MSRP. That can be a little bit difficult as well, and something maybe a little bit disheartening with that. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all continues to play out. But with that, you're looking at this deck, you might be using Wielder of Water, really good card for Master Yi, but not necessarily anything else that you're going to be looking at. So if we go ahead and take a look at the Master Yi deck itself, it's going to be pretty solid. Now, caveat here, this is going to be one that definitely has placed well in tournaments already. This is what is known also as Yi ramp. You're going to have things that are going to help ramp you up to get quickly to the late game. You're going to have things like Find Your Center to play on turn 2 potentially, or you still also have some very small units to be able to get into the game early while also preparing for the late game. Your biggest expensive cards in this deck, of course, is going to be Deadbloom Predator. That is going to be the hardest one for you to probably get, and what is going to make this deck so expensive. Now, again, I do think that this deck, once this game gets released, the Deadbloom Predator should be around probably $30, if I had to guess. Maybe a little bit cheaper, but right now with what we're seeing, it's looking like that it might be around that price point. Right now it's at 70. Don't give into the FOMO. The game's coming out in literally, I mean, when you're watching this video, it's probably already out. Don't give into the FOMO. At the same time, Tasty Fey Folk isn't going to be necessarily too expensive. Same with White Flame Protector. The other thing is going to be the Hourglass, which is going to be pretty dang expensive, unfortunately. You're looking at this card probably going between $8 and $15. Again, these are all predictions because the game hasn't been released yet. But everything else is actually really common or uncommon, which is really good to see. And this is going to be something that really helps you on being able to get off the ground quickly and be able to compete. Dead Blue Predators are such a game changer. If your opponent really starts getting ahead of you, you can go ahead and play a Dead Bloom out into a battlefield, because one of the biggest things that Master Yi really struggles with is in the late game taking back the battlefields that they've lost. And so this is going to be an interesting point because, yeah, you're wanting to go ahead and get 3 Dead Bloom Predators because of how much they can change. But again, depending on how expensive it is and what your budget is, there could be other options to not necessarily have to make it as mainstream meta, but enough for you to at least be able to compete in your local game store, which is going to be very helpful. Tasty Faithfolk is still a really good card. And of course, this again is known as Yi Ramp. There's just regular Master Yi, which just has the low build, the high build, and then a lot of reinforcement cards like Unguard, Discipline, and things of that nature. This one specifically has some more ramp cards than what you would normally see. And then there's Yi Auroras, which was made famous in the last regionals in China. And that uses specifically the Aurora build and hoping for some really big units out fast. Now, that deck does have some pretty big inconsistencies, and you can almost bury yourself if you're not careful with what your draws are. You need a lot to go right for you to be able to play that deck, but if you're able to get those pieces out correctly or at a reasonable time, if you're able to find Auroras and get some ramp, you can devastate your opponent and there's not much they can do. Doing that at a best 2 out of 3 can be a little difficult, and sometimes it's crazy, though, because they'll draw 2 Auroras. But with that, we're going back to this. It's going to be really interesting to see. This is a deck that actually did really good. This is a deck, if I remember correctly, by Freaks, who is a pretty avid Master Yi player, and he did a really good job in his matchup in the Rift Lab Trials and has done really good in the league that I run as well, in first place currently. So really fun stuff to see here, and interesting to see how this will end up continuing to grow. But really good deck idea, very consistent, and again, very beginner friendly as well. Things to keep in mind as you move in. The one thing that I would maybe want to take out, I don't necessarily love the first mate just being a one of. And so, but that's just me. I hate one-ofs. Outside of Master Yi, that's okay because he's outside of your deck. Annie. Now, this is one of my favorites here, and the Annie deck isn't great at all. Not even a little. Kind of a little, but it doesn't necessarily have a whole lot going for it. You do get the 2 Annies and things of that nature, which is pretty awesome. You get your Gus, your Traveling Merchant, which is going to be the bread and butter early game for you. Pouty Poro is also just really good. Sad you're only getting 2, though. And Sneaky Deckhand, one of my favorite cards in this deck because, man, playing it on turn 2 or even turn 1, for example, or, turn 1 with Obelisk, your turn 1 after your opponent's gone first and you have 3 runes is what I mean. And you play Sneaky Deckhand out to a battlefield. Man, that sucks. And so it's a really fun deck, very nitpicky. You got to be very tight with how you play this because you can easily bury yourself. In the sense of any misplays that you end up making, you get in trouble. And this deck doesn't necessarily have a whole ton going for it, especially card draw wise. And even more so, it's not necessarily utilizing a whole ton of the removal in this case either. If we go ahead and take a look at the other side, we have the removal like Void Seeker, Fading Star. If you wanted to even run something like Hextech Ray or things of that nature, you more than are able to. Fight or Flight is going to be such a great card because biggest thing with Annie is that she can move she can move so extremely fast. And so if you take a look at what she's able to do, when you're able to take a battlefield, even with like something like Sneaky Deckhand, then you go ahead and pass, ready 2 runes, your opponent moves something in to stop Sneaky Deckhand, and you just go ahead and play Fight or Flight. And you just send that unit back to base, and you score another point. And you can just move so fast with that. Then likewise, if you have a unit out into a battlefield and they decide to attack into the battlefield that you occupy, you can play Ride the Wind move right over to the other battlefield and score a point on your opponent's turn, and then score a point for upkeep. It's just absolutely insane. And this deck can go 0 to 100 so incredibly fast in this case because of movements like that. Now, of course, the expensive side of this deck is going to be Kai'Sa's, especially, also Darius's, though. That's going to be probably, $8 to $15 again. We're seeing it at around $15 right now in the pre-order, which is why I think it is going to be falling in price, probably to around $10 if I had to guess. But time will tell. But you have just so many stuff that you don't necessarily have to recycle in this case. Flash is such a good card so that you can protect your stuff and start to move back in and just attack and keep up your momentum. Cleave, really good, especially with Darius or really anything else that's trying to move in. Stack deck to really help you dig through your deck to find the cards that you want instead of just the fluff. Very good for you to find the things that you need for the situation that you find yourself in. The end game is so satisfying. I love the end game for this because you're going to go ahead and for 4, you can win the game. As soon as you are at 6 points, you can go ahead and play Vi out, and then you play Ride the Wind, and you get to move a unit and then ready it. Insane. And so Vi just immediately gets spawned in and moves right to a battlefield, and then just like that, you got it. You can win the game because Vi's ability allows you to go ahead and recycle however many cards you want and then just add that much might to Vi. Well, at the end of the game, when you're at 6 points, you're probably going to have 10 cards in your discard. Vi suddenly becomes a 13. Very few things can actually even get over that, and you just win the game. Especially because Vi has ganking, something that a lot of people tend to forget about. Vi is really good for the ganking ability. You cannot, though, activate Vi's ability on your opponent's turn. So you can't stick her to a battlefield. They attack into the battlefield, and then you just activate her ability. You can't do that. But the removal and everything is good. Where Annie struggles is if you happen to be recycling too much, or you just are unable to keep at least 2 or 3, maybe even, well, especially more, 2 or 3 cards in your hand at the minimum. If you really start to struggle on your card draw, you fall behind and it really struggles. Same if you're unable to get like Traveling Merchant out early game, or your battlefields aren't necessarily there to help you, get down or get your cards into your trash in this case, then you're going to be finding yourself really struggling towards that mid to late game. Sometimes it is only going to take you 6 cards in your discard for the Vi to go through. And the Annie here is going to be such a clutch play because if you end up finding or not finding your Ride the Wind, or you even end up using your Ride the Wind earlier in the game, Annie can go ahead and find Ride the Wind in your trash or even any other spell, including even Falling Star, which is the best removal in the game right now. If you do end up getting in a little bit of trouble and you need to find some cards to get that final answer, Annie can also even be summoned to go ahead and find stacked decks so that you can find the cards that you need to be able to win the game. So a lot of really fun answers that you can have, and a lot of fun that you can have even with this deck as well, that just makes it such a fun game for you to pilot this deck, though it does come with a lot of its challenges as well. Really, look up Sold Out's gameplay. He is so good at this. He also has a meta as well for Annie specifically, with hours and hours of content for you to be able to review and just at a decent value as well. So really great stuff there. Definitely check out Sold Out's resources. Great player. Garen. Interesting, to say the least. This is the guy who basically who built this deck and did so good, chose Chaos. Now, the deck that we're looking at, for the Rift Lab Trials 2 tournament that I picked for this deck. You look at this, and you're like, what is even going on with this structure deck? And that's a good question. No one knows. Experts are still investigating this with little to no answers to show for it. It's not good. You're going to be struggling in a lot of your matchups. You do have some really good stuff that you might be able to attack in on. It really sucks because in Runeterra, Garen was such a good card. And so it's really sad to see, especially such a popular hero, not necessarily have a great deck here. There's a lot that you're going to need to necessarily do to get this card up to snuff. But even still, the upgrades are still a pretty good option as well. Again, though, the expensive cards are going to specifically be Deadbloom Predator and Dazzling Aurora. This is going to be an interesting idea, though, and I really like this, what they're trying to go for. And this is really the only thing that is going to be making Garen viable is Dazzling Aurora. Because of that, you are going to be ramping to Dazzling Aurora, and if you don't, then you do just really struggle. The cool part about this deck, though, is that you can go ahead and hit a lot of really great units into that mid to late game. And also, once you get the Dazzling Auroras out, you can play Divine Judgment and just lock you and your opponent down, but you are still going to be able to use the abilities of Dazzling Aurora and shut down your opponent basically with the game. That's maybe the one change that I would make, is put Divine Judgment down to 2, because if you have 2 in your hand and no reason to use them, it's a dead card. Otherwise, though, this is a really interesting deck, able to do a lot. Flurry of Blades is a really interesting idea as well. Maybe something that I would necessarily side deck instead, but it's a very interesting option here because it does deal 1 damage, which is very helpful to all battlefields, and that can shut down certain matchups, especially namely Darius in this case. But even just 1 damage can do a lot on helping you get over the hump of the might that your opponent might be at. It can be a really good deck, and of course, first on, you're going to be doing Zon Warrens again, trying to get you to get rid of the cards that you don't have or don't want to have in your hand for the cards that you need. If you don't get Dazzling Aurora in hand, you suck. You're not going to win this game. And this is luckily a good build in the sense that this is not just your one-trick pony necessarily. But if you don't find the Auroras, you are going to be struggling. And so that's something to keep in mind if you are thinking of building this deck. Likewise, you have Aspirant's Climb, which is going to make the game 1 longer. That is going to be the card that you play first. Your opponent has to score 9 points, making it so much longer. Surprisingly, you would think only 1 point doesn't necessarily make it that much more of a climb. But man, it really does. Obelisk of Power is going to be probably, you could do Obelisk of Power when you opt to go first. So if you end up winning game, or if you end up winning game 1, you would go with the Zon Warrens. Going game 3, then if you end up going to a game 3, you would go Obelisk of Power, get up to 3 runes, and then you could even do like a Mobilize or something along those lines to get things moving. There's even times, which kind of really sucks, where you are playing the Confront, and that's basically going to be played literally just to make sure that you are able to draw a card in the early game, because sometimes you just need that answer. So really interesting deck idea. It did decent so far in the tournaments that I've seen this. Not necessarily tier 1, but definitely not something to not take seriously when you go against it. Again, though, that's more so just knowing your matchups and how that's going to end up going for you. Now, likewise, Lux, kind of the same issue that you have. Now, you do have Final Spark, which is really good. Singularity is an awesome card. Lecturing Yordle, really, really good card. And Lux. The difficult part about the, 4 cost Lux, any removal will kill it. Not just Falling Star, any removal will kill it, kind of thing. You're not going to necessarily be using it in battles unless you're at the end game, of course. But you go against your opponent and they play some removal and it's gone. Or you go against Lee Sin, you go against anything green, for example, and they charm it and it's gone. Doesn't feel great, especially with her ability being so good. She just doesn't have the might there, which makes it so difficult to play her in this case. Now, of course, Ravenbloom Student, one of the best cards in this game. Just such a good early 2-cost. Daring Poro, so fun. Love how the Poros are in this game. Stupefy, really good. Falling Comet, awesome. Kind of. But again, you're going to be really struggling because the big thing is that you need to get units out early game so that when you clear the board late game, you are able to have something to actually take the battlefield. Too many times I would see I would see the board being cleared, but then you don't have any units out onto the battlefield. and your opponent would just rebuild their board, and you're like, okay, well, I removed your board again. I still don't have any units. I'm still drawing a card, and my opponent rebuilds their board. And it's like, what do I do then? You know? And so that's going to be the big thing is usually you would be going ahead and building a little bit more token focused and low to the ground so that you can be able to do both, where you do play something like a Daring Poro out and then you play a Singularity. That can be very helpful for you to be able to get things moving. Now, you got to be so careful about how you go about this because, man, it can be a difficult matchup, period. And again, Lux isn't even necessarily tier 2. She is bottom of the tier with Garen, though even I would put Garen above Lux in this case. That's how just not there she is. You are using the Aspirant's Climb, but again, that's literally just to give you that little bit more of an advantage to win. But again, if you love Lux, feel free to, play her. There have been a couple of tournaments where she has done decent, but it's a struggle. If you're going to your locals and you just really love Lux, you're going to have a great time. She's a really fun deck. If you're going to Houston for the regionals and you bring Lux, it's like that South Park guy. You're going to have a bad time. So you got to be a little careful about how you go about that. And that can be a very difficult thing here that you need to watch for because she's just not there yet. It'll be really interesting to see what happens later down the line and what maybe some interaction she could potentially get. But as of right now, Lux, unfortunately, just is not competitive. But with that being said, this is going to be really interesting to see. Were you able to actually get a Proving Grounds? If you were, what are your thoughts about these decks? Are you going to be playing it more in a multiplayer fashion like what it's made for? Or are you going to try to build up your deck to be competitive with the best? Let me know down in the comments below. And what deck are you going to build as this game gets released in literally 2 days? That's insane. Let me know down in the comments below. And until next time, guys, have a good one.